Imagine a night out with friends, just a casual get-together, and then it suddenly spirals into this unimaginable tragedy. What if that tragedy was officially ruled an accident, but the details that started coming out later paint a much more unsettling picture, leaves you with way more questions than answers? Today we're doing a deep dive into the mysterious death of Tamla Horsford. It's a case that's, well, it's captivated and confounded people for years now. It's drawn official investigations, sure, but also this huge public demand for answers. And you've given us a really fascinating stack of sources: true crime podcasts, news reports, investigative documents, the works. Our mission here is to unpack the key moments, the conflicting information, all those lingering questions around Tamla's passing, so you can walk away really well informed about a story that just keeps resonating.
It really does. And it's a narrative that's just riddled with complexities.
Okay.
Our sources, they really highlight just how many layers there are to peel back here. We're going to explore how this story, which was sort of dismissed initially, ended up gaining national attention. A lot of that was down to persistent advocacy, social media, long after the first official findings came out.
Okay, let's dig into the beginning then. The scene.
Mm-hmm.
It was November 3rd, 2018, a birthday party hosted by Gene Myers in Forsyth County, Georgia. Most guests were these football moms, right?
Yeah.
Knew each other through youth football. And the plan was for people to stay over, avoid anyone drinking and driving. Smart.
Exactly. And Tamla Horsford arrives. She's 40, a mother of 5, known as a super mom, apparently. She comes with a bottle of tequila, her overnight bag. Seems perfectly normal.
So what happens during the party?
Well, the group, they're drinking, watching an LSU-Alabama football game. College football. Gene Myers' boyfriend, Jose Barrera, was there, and another guest boyfriend, Tom Smith. They were downstairs watching football first, then came up and joined the win for Cards Against Humanity.
Okay, typical party stuff. And Tamla herself, what were her actions like that night?
Sources say she was a habitual smoker, so she stepped out onto the balcony a few times for cigarettes. She also smoked some marijuana. Apparently Myers teased her about it, even called her the female Bob Marley. And yeah, she was drinking tequila, but the reports we have consistently say she didn't seem, overly drunk or out of it.
Okay, that detail about not seeming drunk.
Yeah.
That feels important, maybe. Keep that in mind.
Definitely. It contrasts pretty sharply with the later official findings. So the night winds down, guests start leaving around 11:30 p.m. Myers and Barrera, the hosts, they go to bed around 1:30 a.m. And the last person confirmed to see Tamla alive was Bridget Fuller. That was about 1:47 a.m., just before her husband picked her up. Fuller said Tamla was eating some gumbo and was planning to have one last cigarette before bed.
And didn't the home security system pick something up around then?
Yeah, that's another interesting piece. The data shows the back door, likely the one to the balcony, opened, then closed, then opened again for the final time at 1:57 a.m.
1:57 a.m. Okay. Then silence until the next morning.
Until the next morning. Around 8:45 a.m., Myers' live aunt, Madeline Lombardi, goes outside, and she finds Tamla, face down in the backyard, unmoving.
Oh, wow. So what happens immediately after that discovery?
This part has drawn a lot of commentary. Lombardi reportedly said a prayer first. Then she went inside to wake up Gene Myers. It wasn't until about 9:00 a.m., so maybe 15 minutes after finding the body, that 911 was called. Both Myers and Barrera called. Myers told the operator Tamla was not breathing and stiff, and she speculated right there on the call she was drinking, and I'm guessing maybe she fell off the balcony.
Okay, so the fall theory is mentioned almost immediately.
Right, from the 911 call, yeah. And Tamla was pronounced dead at the scene.
So the investigation begins. How did the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, the FSCO, approach it initially?
Well, even though Tamla's body was sent for a full autopsy, the FSCO seemed to latch onto that accident theory pretty quickly. They basically worked backwards from the idea that she fell. And after about 4 months, on February 20th, 2019, they closed the case. They cited the toxicology report and their determination that she fell from the balcony. Case closed.
And the coroner's report backed that up.
Officially, yes. The coroner's certificate listed the death as an accident. It stated the cause was multiple blunt force injuries from the fall. It also noted acute ethanol intoxication. Her blood alcohol content, BAC, was 0.238.
0.238, that's quite high. Almost 3 times the legal driving limit.
It is. And she also tested positive for THC, marijuana, which aligns with reports from the party, and significantly a small amount of alprazolam, which is Xanax.
Xanax. Was there any talk of her taking that at the party?
Not that came out initially, no. That becomes a question mark later.
Okay, so official ruling, accidental fall, high BAC, presence of THC and Xanax, case closed. But not for everyone.
Not by a long shot. Tamla's family and friends, they immediately questioned these findings. Loudly.
What specifically were they questioning? The injuries.
Exactly. This is where it gets really contentious. The family on about the injuries just didn't match a 15-foot fall. We're talking about a laceration to her heart, a broken neck, a dislocated wrist, plus other injuries all over her body. Her best friend, Michelle Graves, put it bluntly, it's impossible to get the injuries that she had from one fall. That fundamental mismatch, the severity and type of injuries versus the described fall, that was the core of their doubt.
Beyond the injuries, were there other concerns about how the whole thing was handled right at the start, the scene itself?
Oh, definitely. Critics jumped on that pretty quickly. Issues with scene management. The scene was reportedly not preserved correctly. That's a huge red flag in any death investigation. And maybe even more crucial, witnesses weren't immediately interviewed, or at least not thoroughly right away.
So potential evidence could have been compromised. People's initial recollections weren't captured.
That's the concern, yeah. When you don't secure a scene and talk to witnesses immediately, it creates doubt. It fuels mistrust in whatever conclusion is reached later. Even if the conclusion is correct, it just looks bad. And that delay in calling 911 Lombardi praying, then waking Miles, that also got flagged by commentators.
Well,
Why the delay?
and then there's the racial dimension. Tamla was the only black woman there. Forsyth County, known for being predominantly white. Did that play into the reaction?
It absolutely did. You can't really ignore that context. It immediately raised questions, you
Right.
know, did her race affect how seriously the investigation was initially treated? Were there unconscious biases at play? Plus, the fact that her death wasn't widely reported until February 2019, months later, that caused outrage. People felt it showed a lack of care or attention possibly linked to her race.
Okay, so doubts about the injuries, concerns about the scene, the racial context, and then things get even more complicated with scandals involving law enforcement connected to the case.
Yeah, this is where it gets really messy internally. Let's talk about Jose Barrera first, the homeowner's boyfriend. He worked for the Solicitor General's office as a pretrial officer, a position of trust within the legal system. But he got fired in December 2018. Why? Because he was caught accessing confidential documents about Tamla's case while he was on the job.
Wow. Accessing files related to a death that occurred at his girlfriend's house where he was present? That's not good.
Not good at all. A major breach. And it didn't stop there. His statements about what happened at the scene were inconsistent.
How so?
Well, according to a report by Lieutenant Andy Kalin, Barrera admitted over the phone that he'd checked Tamla's left arm for a pulse, and so he'd moved it. But later, when the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, interviewed Barrera, he flat out denied moving the arm. He called Kalin's report bullshit. That's a direct quote.
A direct contradiction on a key point, whether the body was moved before officials arrived.
Exactly. And it gets worse. The GBI report revealed that Kalin and Barrera knew each other professionally. They worked together at the courthouse. And it also came out that Barrera had been fired from a previous job at the state probation office for lying about a relationship. So you have someone present at the scene, accessing files improperly, giving conflicting statements with a history of dishonesty. It doesn't inspire confidence.
No kidding. And he wasn't the only official whose conduct came under fire, right? What about the lead investigator, Mike Christian?
Right, Mike Christian. He was the lead investigator for the FSCO on Tamla's case. He resigned in October 2020, right in the middle of an internal affairs investigation.
What was the IA investigation about?
Pretty serious misconduct. He was accused of sending confidential case information details, even photos in one instance to women he was having affairs with, extramarital affairs. The IA conclusion was that he violated his oath of office and neglected his duty. And specifically regarding Tamla's case, some of the women interviewed by the GBI said Christian only ever referred to Tamla as porch lady.
Porch lady. That's deeply disrespectful and dehumanizing.
Incredibly so. Especially coming from the lead investigator, it speaks volumes about his attitude, potentially.
Did Christian himself ever express any doubts about the official accidental fall theory?
Privately, it seems he did. One of his ex-girlfriends told the GVI that Christian shared the toxicology results with her, yes, but also shared his suspicion that the body had been moved. She also claimed he sent her a crime scene photo of Tamla's body and told her point blank he doubted Tamla fell from the balcony based on the injuries he saw.
So the lead investigator is privately saying he doesn't buy the official story he's supposedly building.
That's what this ex-girlfriend claimed, yeah. A massive contradiction if true. She also said Christian suspected Barrera and Lieutenant Callan had been talking before the 911 call was made. He apparently thought Callan might have helped the partygoers coordinate their story.
Did they find any proof of those calls?
Well, that specific part wasn't corroborated. The GBI checked Barrera's cell records and found no network usage between midnight and 10 a.m. that morning, so no proof of those specific calls. But the suspicion itself, coming from the lead investigator, it adds another layer of doubt.
And didn't Christian admit to sending some really offensive messages?
Mhm.
Snapchats?
He did. He admitted sending Snapchats that were, let's say, incredibly sarcastic and in extremely poor taste. One was a mock notification to Tamla's husband about her death. It's awful. It read, "Hello, sir. I know we've never met, but I'm here to tell you that your wife and the mother of your 6 children is dead. Well, yes, I am happy to report that she was really, really drunk, trick-landed face down in the backyard, and I know you have fond memories. Enjoy corralling these 6 boys who are now going apeshit."
That's it. I don't even have words for that. It's horrific.
It is. And there was another one. "Greetings from racist, cracker bastard, murder covering up land. How are you? It's a nice rainy day, good for digging shallow graves by the red side." The family's lawyer believed that last bit about shallow graves was a nasty dig at Michelle Graves, Tamla's best friend, who was being very vocal.
So you have the homeowner's boyfriend accessing files and giving conflicting stories, and the lead investigator engaging in serious misconduct, expressing private doubts, and sending these vile messages.
Yeah. It paints a really disturbing picture of the initial investigation's integrity. It makes it almost impossible for the family or the public to trust the original findings when this is the backdrop.
Understandably. So with all this coming out, how did the public react, especially given the lack of early media coverage?
The reaction, once the story broke and these details emerged, was intense, especially on social media. Since mainstream media was slow to pick it up, online activism really drove the narrative. Hashtags like #JusticeForTamla started trending for days. People were sharing the story, demanding answers.
Did any high-profile people get involved?
Yes, that definitely amplified things. Figures like T.I., 50 Cent, Kim Kardashian, they shared posts about Tamla. And importantly, they often explicitly linked her death to the broader Black Lives Matter movement, which was gaining huge momentum, particularly after George Floyd's murder. That context brought even more eyes to the case.
And there were petitions too, right?
Huge petitions. One started by Ashley Harris on Change.org got over 600,000 signatures. They were aiming for 1 million. The sheer volume of public outcry became impossible to ignore.
So did this pressure lead to any official action, a reopening of the case?
It did. In July 2020, Sheriff Ron Freeman, the same Forsyth County sheriff, who, it's worth noting, had faced his own accusations of racism back in 2014, he made an announcement. He said the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, would launch a new probe into Tamla's death. He stated it was probably best for an independent agency to take over, given all the questions and, implicitly, the scandals.
Okay, so the GBI steps in for a fresh look. What did they find? When did their results come out?
They took some time, conducted their investigation. Then, in May 2021, the Forsyth County District Attorney, Penny Penn, announced the GBI had finished.
And the conclusion was?
Essentially, the GBI sided with the original FSCO findings. They concluded Tamla's death was, in fact, caused by an accidental fall from the balcony. As a result, no criminal charges would be filed. Penn stated, quote, "There was no evidence that anyone else was responsible for Mrs. Horsford's death or that foul play was in any way involved."
So after all the public pressure, the scandals, the second look by an independent agency, they came back to the same conclusion.
Accident.
Pretty much, yeah. According to the official GBI report, that was their finding.
But somehow I feel like that's not the end of the story. Did that satisfy everyone? The family?
Not at all. For the family, friends, and many advocates, the GBI conclusion just didn't resolve the core inconsistencies, especially around the injuries. The distrust, particularly after the revelations about Barrera and Christian, was just too deep.
So what happened then? More pressure. More pressure. By 2022, believe it or not, another petition from the family gained traction, this one also getting over 500,000 signatures. It actually prompted the GBI to agree to look at the case again.
A third look. Wow, this case just refuses to stay closed.
It really highlights the gap between the official narrative and the belief of those closest to Tamla, fueled by those lingering questions.
Let's talk about those lingering questions then. The Xanax, for instance. We mentioned it was in her system but wasn't accounted for at the party. Did the GBI shed any light on that?
It's still a bit of a mystery. The GBI report did note that one partygoer admitted having a Xanax prescription. This person admitted giving a small amount of Xanax to another friend from the party, not Tamla, the morning after Tamla died. They even had text messages confirming this exchange. But this person was adamant they did not give any Xanax to Tamla herself. So the GBI report acknowledges this, but doesn't definitively conclude how the alprazolam got into Tamla's system. It remains an unanswered question mark.
Okay, so the Xanax source is still unclear. What about other theories? I remember reading something unusual.
You might be thinking of the theory brought up by Tamla's husband's best friend, Stephen Reynolds. He told GBI investigators he suspected two of the couples at the party were swingers, and he speculated that Tamla's death might somehow have been sexually motivated, perhaps related to that dynamic.
Swingers. Sexually motivated? Did that theory appear anywhere else in the investigation?
No, it seems to have been solely Reynolds' speculation. It didn't appear to be corroborated by any other evidence or testimony found in the extensive investigation records we reviewed. The GBI did look into Tamla's husband, Leander Horsford, obtaining warrants for his phone and social media, but they reported finding nothing relevant to the case there either.
So basically a friend's theory, but not one supported by the wider investigation.
Correct. It's one of those threads that adds to the complexity but didn't lead anywhere officially.
So where does that leave things now? Especially for Tamla's family.
They remain completely unconvinced by the official conclusions. They are still actively seeking answers. Their lawyer, Ralph Fernandez, he described the whole situation as an ever-expanding event. He pointed to complications from, in his words, official intermeddling, a lack of cooperation from law enforcement, and distractions from the main investigation. He's apparently working on his own comprehensive report on the case, so for them and for their lawyer, this is far from over.
So we've taken this deep dive into Tamla Horsford's death. It started as a, seemingly innocent gathering, then came the official ruling of an accidental death. But we've seen how persistent questions about the injuries, the scene, the investigation itself just wouldn't go away. Plus those really disturbing internal law enforcement issues and the power of public advocacy that kept forcing this case back into the light.
Is a stark reminder of how messy and complex these situations can become, especially when there's a breakdown of trust between officials and the community or the victim's family.
Absolutely. It really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? What does it actually mean for a case to be closed when so many fundamental questions remain unanswered? For the people most affected, the grieving family, and for a public that's still watching, it makes you wonder, what is the real threshold for justice when the official story just struggles to line up with the perceived facts, especially for those closest to the victim? And what role does that continued public pressure, that refusal to let it go, play in the ongoing search for what really happened?